Why don't kids read? I'll tell you why they don't read. It's because kids' books today suck. That's why they don't read. So I've got a guy on today who is out to fix that. In fact, he's been trying to fix that for years now. He is a children's author of the Jimi and Isaac series. His name's Phil Rink. He's a professional engineer, and he's here to tell you why, A, an engineer and a writer aren't like oil and water, and B, why we need to do a heck of a lot better to get our kids reading and learning right once again. Phil Rink is here with us. Stay tuned here on Manufacturing Talks.
Welcome to Manufacturing Talks with Jim Vinosky. Industry has a million cool stories, and Jim talks to the movers and shakers who are making them happen. Let's dive in.
PYS Media, your digital media relations agency. Public relations, website design, digital marketing. You get found by the customers and talent who need your solutions. You get media placements in top publications, the best job candidates coming to your website, a digital presence that gets you found by the right people. Call 616-298-8798 to get started today.
Okay, welcome back to Manufacturing Talks. I'm Jim Vinosky, your host, and thanks as always to DYS Media, our sponsor. Look them up. Great guys over there. I'm really happy to be joined by a guy who I've admired for a long time. His name's Phil Rink. He is an engineer like me, except he's better because he's a professional engineer, which I'm not. And there's a whole detail thing to that. You can go look that up. But he's an engineer who also writes kids' books, and that's near and dear to my heart. Welcome, Phil.
Hi, Jim. Thanks for the nice words.
Absolutely. Lot to cover today. This one I could talk for hours on. But before we launch into that, why don't you just tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. So I'm a mechanical engineer. My wife, Nancy, is also a mechanical engineer. I was born here in Los Alamos, New Mexico, and then lived a part of my early life in Las Vegas, Nevada, while my dad worked on testing nuclear rocket engines, actually. And then we moved back to Los Alamos, and he was one of the first guys to burn something with a laser, which is kind of
that's too cool.
Grew up in that kind of environment as normal. Sure. We didn't really know what our parents did for a living, but we kind of had a clue. Got my first engineering job at the lab, working on remote handling of nuclear materials at the Mason physics facility, which is a huge accelerator. They would accelerate protons and run them into things, and then see what came out of the collision, and then study that. So it made everything very radioactive, and I spent a little over 2 years as an engineering intern there, learning about. We had the world's most fancy force feedback electromechanical manipulators. So the operator would be in a trailer somewhere, and a few hundred feet away in a very radioactive area, they could pick stuff up and see if it was heavy, and put nuts on bolts and all kinds of incredible fancy things that, again, I took for normal. So that's just that's what you do when you go to work. From there, I tried to expand that knowledge into subsea. So I went to work for a company in Canada. That didn't work out too well, but I did develop a couple of robots for the Expo 86 in Vancouver.
Nice.
And one of those folded in through paper airplanes, and that ended up in the Smithsonian, which was pretty cool.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, of course. And came back here. That job, like I said, the company kind of folded up. So Nancy got a job at Boeing and ended up building 767s and 747s. I was in the factory, and Nancy was the what they call the manufacturing planner. She figured out how to join the wings to the fuselage on the 747-400.
Wow.
And was very successful at that, named Employee of the Month at one point, and we both had a lot of fun with that. Then did other general automation. Then Nancy and I recognized that we were working tons of overtime and not spending enough time with our kids. So we decided we'd start our own company, based on the mom and pop have a grocery store and live upstairs model. And we started an underwater video camera, and that became more successful than we could have ever dreamed. Similar to the GoPro, except for it was basically right at the start of the miniaturization of electronics, but before we had good batteries, before we had good storage media. So we still had a cable. So it was a camera on a cable, but for consumers that you could use in lakes and ocean and see the fish underwater and all that kind of
Cool.
thing.
Yep.
Yeah. And then sold that company. And then since then we've tried a few other ventures, but mostly we found out that lightning doesn't necessarily strike twice. So,
yeah. But that being said, I mean, you two have done all this super cool, geeky tech stuff that, you know, engineers like me can only salivate over.
right.
And then there's this shift, right? So tell us more about how you went from that to writing books for kids.
So when my daughter was about 11 or 12, she was a pretty good reader, but she's not a literary person. And I would put myself in that same category. And so she came to me and she said, you know, I can't find any books that I like to read. And I said, just go talk to your librarian and tell them the subjects that you're interested in, and your librarian will help you. And she went to school and she got a copy of Hatchet by Gary Paulsen.
Yep.
Gary Paulsen. And she brought it home and she was really excited about it. So she brought it to me and I read it, and then we talked about it, and we read all of the Gary Paulsen books and talked about them, and it was really great. And she said, well, you know, I can't find any more. And I said, oh, come on, of course you can. And you know, just go talk to your librarian. And she did. And she said, no, there's nothing else. And so I went and talked to the librarian and, you know, told her that I grew up on this kind of stuff. What happened to it? You know, I read Encyclopedia Brown, all of the Beatrice and Ramona and
yep.
What is that? Anyway, all of that kind
Huggins.
of stuff that's just simple, straightforward, realistic fiction that you could put yourself in.
Yep.
And the librarian said, no, that's all gone. It's gone and it hasn't been replaced. And it's full of what's left in the libraries is books for kids that love to read. Right. They just want to immerse themselves in a big, thick book and curl up in a corner. And that's what the publishing industry has become. So I, you know, being fairly egotistical, said I can solve this. And that was in 2001, 2002. And I wrote the story, Jimi Isaac, the Mars Mission. It was called something a little bit different. Finished it pretty quickly, was able to put the story together, and it went together pretty well. And then I started to shop it around just to friends and then to industry people and tried to work and get it published. And I found out that really being a writer is not quite as simple as I thought it would be. And it took me another 7 years to get it to the point where I was happy with the writing.
Yep. And
I continued to work on getting it sold, but the industry is not interested in that kind of stuff. You know, they're first of all, you know, it's Jimi and Isaac, two boys. So that's a strike, which is really incredible to say out loud, but
correct.
But and then it's, you know, it's a technical story. They build rocket parts. And so it involves what materials they used and what adhesives did they use and how did they get the parts to work and how did they problem solve, and that's all in the book. And of course the people that run the publishing industry now think that nobody cares about that stuff. I mean, I literally got several letters saying, what are you talking about? Nobody cares about this stuff. And it's like, well, nobody you know cares about this stuff, but I'll guarantee there are people that care about this stuff. So we banged our heads on it for another 3 or 4 years trying to get it sold, and then just went ahead and self-published and have been working on it in that way ever since. We're up to 10 books. 2 or 3 of them are pretty technical. 2 of them are about sports. There's a couple that are about emotions and getting along with yourself and being responsible, but they're still more, let's say, factual based instead of morally based. I try not to have too much of a moral, except for, keep after it.
Yep.
Admit your mistakes and make your mistakes and keep going.
I'm going to dive into a few of those here in a minute. But I did. So it's funny because, like, right over here, I've got a whole bookshelf that's full of kids' books. It's stuff that I grew up reading, my wife grew up reading, that we got so we'd have them for our boys if they had any interest. And, just pulling out a few before we got on. So there's one called Prairie School. This one's really old, by a woman named Lois Lenski. She did all her own illustrations, and got that one from, one of those, what was it? Scholastic book clubs that we had when we were kids.
Right.
Which, as you're talking about your daughter not being able to find things, I just remember we'd get those order forms, and, I'd want to spend more money than I had available to me buying all the books that were on those order forms. And we get so excited when the books were coming in, and my boys never got to experience that for exactly the reason that you said, because the books that are on there are garbage. I mean, in my intro to this show, I said, the reason kids don't read is because books today suck. And my younger son's a big reader. He comes home and tells me about all the crap in his library. It's like you say, it's all got to fit particular political narratives and diversity initiatives. Hey, there's nothing wrong with having books about different kinds of people, but they don't all have to be about everybody, right?
Right.
We had Trixie Belden.
Right.
She was a girl mystery solver. We had the Hardy Boys. They were boy mystery solvers. Another one, I had the whole series from Scholastic Books, is a woman named Ruth Chu, who wrote a series about witches. Could you even write a series about witches? Maybe if they're, anti-Christian, it would be fine in today's schools. My very favorite book when I was growing up, Forest Fire Mystery, a bunch of boys out west. And you hadn't read that, you should. It's awesome. My very favorite series, the Alfred Hitchcock 3 Investigator series. I used to lie on the floor in our local public library and read those over and over and over again. And we have nothing like that today. And I so loved reading. And my boys were able to get into some things at times. So, like, my younger son got huge into Harry Potter, which was phenomenal. Read every one, watched the movies. But then, like you say, then there's nothing else. Right.
Yeah.
And so it's just a shame. And, as we look at, we're talking about not having the technical training, the technically trained people we need today. Well, if you don't have books like you write that are technically oriented when you're young, how are you going to get that interest?
Yeah. There's no path, and there's no shop class. And, I helped a robotics club last year, and they actually met in the junior high school that I went to. And I walked in the room and I just got the chills, because it was the shop. It's where I grew up in 7th and 8th grade.
Yep.
And we had a table saw, we had a wood lathe, we poured aluminum into sand molds. We had a router and a shaper table and a edger and all of this stuff. And I just had to sit down for a while, because it just felt so amazing and visceral to be back into it. But
but they, like you say, they had booted that all out of the schools. And then thank God for people like Dean Kamen, who came along and realized the need of the future as robotics was coming in, that kids would have to have that knowledge. And, he launched FIRST. We have Best Robotics, all the programs out there that now brought that back. But I know in our local school system, it's still kind of tangential to the school. And it's that select group of kids who go into that program who get to play with those things, and no one else does. Right.
And there's no pipeline starting in elementary school to get them to it.
Right.
And then now, if even gas cars are becoming unworkable.
Yeah.
Right? You can't maintain them.
Can't
and
do
if
it
they go
yourself.
electric, that's great if we can get it to work, but that was where a lot of engineers came from, is building their go-kart, building their mini bike, having their first car that was a piece of junk, and then getting it running. And if that path is gone, now we're sounding like everybody say, okay, boomer, and get it over with. But where is the path that you learn how to weld, how to, do the things that make learning visceral, that make it matter on a very visceral, very foundational way.
And having that personal tie to some interest you have for yourself that then blossoms out and leads to that more extensive education. That's the beauty of what you do. I pulled out the whole stack I had down here. I do have all of your books. This is not all of them. The first several are missing, which is good because they're probably up in my boys' rooms.
Good.
But I've got cow poop, and I've got solar powered, and I've got show calf, and I've got the brain injury, which, by the way, I still curse you for, because as I believe I sent you a note about afterward, that one did make me cry openly, which I'm an engineer too. We don't like to cry.
No, we don't. Nothing's that important.
But I mean, just awesome stuff. I've read every one. I still read these kids' books because they're so good. And it's such a shame that we don't have that broadly anymore. But you're doing it.
A kid's book at this level is not a children's book.
Right.
It's a simply written adult book if you do it correctly.
Yep.
And there's layers and layers. Well, you hate to pretend that it's crafted, but you can understand it in a simple way. And then later on, you'll go, oh, wait a minute, there's more there.
I would say that crafting something like this, where it can grab a kid's interest and also hold an adult's interest, is a lot more difficult than age specific.
Right. And I've never understood why you would want to take the details out of the story. Chris and Pat go to the place and do the thing is a structure. But if you just write that same book 10,000 times, the kids get that. They understand that. They may not be able to articulate it, but they know you're being condescending to them. And if you take away all of the, we were talking about the old book series. One of my favorites growing up was the Nancy Drew mysteries.
Oh yes, got those over here.
It's fascinating to read those now, because actually they're pretty politically correct. They talk about women dominating their lives, coming at it from very, very different directions.
Yep.
But yet there was it's been maybe 5 or 10 years now that somebody bought those books and tried to re-release them and got canceled because you have to take the guns out, and you have to take the condescending language out, and you have to change it and sterilize it. And then, and then there's been, I think, 4 different attempts to turn it into a TV series that I've seen. And the same things happen where they try and force it into a mold instead of just let it be quirky and let it be itself.
Right.
And it just, of course it doesn't work.
Yep. Well, and to your point, you were talking about the kind of generic structure, and it's that same thing with the political correctness and the political focus. When you force everything to be that narrative, kids lose interest. They might read 1 or 2 of those,
right?
But they're not going to keep reading that stuff because it's the same thing over and over and over again. And oh, by the way, when you focus on that as your writing stinks. Focus on your writing and the story, and maybe we weave some of that stuff in, but it's the total focus of so many of these books. My younger son's talked about, he tried to read these things and they're just such utter repulsive garbage. He put them down.
Well, and we can even relate it to a manufacturing standpoint. Is that the publishing industry it's kind of funny because they've studied themselves because they know they have a problem.
Right.
Okay. But the publishing industry is located in New York City.
Yep.
And it's staffed with unpaid interns from the New York area. So these are all young women that went to all meaning, mostly.
Yep. The majority.
Young women that went to liberal arts colleges in northeastern United States and are willing to work for free because they just love books. Okay. And that's the industry. And that's what the industry has created around itself. And so, of course, it's homogeneous. And of course, it doesn't take risks. Right. It doesn't
and fails to connect with them.
Look for new ideas.
Right.
And when it's failing, and it knows that it's failing, 30% of the population, at least 30% of our children didn't read a book. And that was last year. And that was pre-COVID. Now it's more like 50 to 60%.
Yeah.
And the publishing industry knows that. And they say, well, that's because of YouTube, or that's because of video games. It's not our fault. We've done what we can. And first of all, yes, it is your fault. And second of all, reading is so crucial. I don't care whether you make a living at it. For our school libraries are now completely dependent on the scholastic pipeline. Completely. It's a total monopoly pathway. There is no other way for the libraries to get books except for through that New York City pipeline. And so, if you take a kid that didn't read a book last year, ask them what they're interested in, walk over to the library with them, chances are there will not be a book on that subject, whatever it is. It'll be Pat and Chris go to the place and do the thing. And the kid won't care enough. They're not readers. They might read if you give them a book that's about what they care about, but they're not going to read the book just to read a book. They don't care.
No. And my kids would bring home those, supposedly same catalogs of books that they could order from Scholastic, and they wouldn't order anything. They had no interest in anything that was in there.
Right. It didn't speak to them.
Nope.
The other side, the other factor, and again, to get back to a manufacturing viewpoint, is that there's a guy named Charles W. Campbell that in the 50s, I think, or the 60s, figured out what a story is. He analyzed all the great myths, and he figured out what a story is. And then he wrote a book about it. And then this guy named Steven Spielberg went to film school and studied storytelling and studied Charles W. Campbell. And he wrote this movie called Star Wars that hits every checkbox in the Charles W. Campbell myth structure. Every single one. Yoda is in the structure. Darth Vader is in there. Obi-Wan is in there. So he just chunked it out. And then he looked up all the World War II footage and he blocked everything in and then reproduced it as a movie and made a nickel or two. And then everybody noticed that. And they said, oh, well, here's how we're going to tell stories from now on because it works. And that's good, right? But it's over-optimized. It's fragile. So now you've gone down this path where you know exactly what you're going to do and you just keep chunking it out, and you don't have the happy accidents happen. You don't have discoveries made by accident because you don't make any mistakes. You just keep chunking out the same thing in the same template over and over again.
Yeah, all homogenized.
And it just gets narrower and narrower focused.
Yep.
So I think that's probably, I think those two things are more important than the social correctness. I mean, I think that's an issue, but I think absolutely it's more structure within the industry that's preventing them from taking risks and making mistakes.
So you went the self-publishing route, and obviously you're cut out of that whole homogenized world. So what is it you do to get your books out in front of people and make people aware of that you've got these awesome books and people ought to be reading them?
And we have new covers, by the way.
Oh, yes, I knew that.
Yeah, we wanted them to look more normal because it's important for us to be roughly normal.
Yeah.
So, but we thought maybe somebody cares about them being more normal. So we went to that. Before COVID, we were gaining quite a bit of momentum doing book tours where we'd go to schools and we'd talk to a portion of the student body, usually the entire 6th and 7th grade class, maybe 5th, 6th, and 7th, depending on the structure of the middle schools within within the school systems.
Yeah.
And we were having quite a bit of success with that and developing substantial momentum, hoping for at some point we would get in front of the school librarian that had a friend in the business, right? Just trying to find a toehold. And we were doing pretty well with that, and we were certainly having fun with it. And then COVID hit and the whole thing blew up.
Yeah.
So I don't think we'll be doing school visits anytime soon, although we'd love to. But basically the schools aren't even answering their phone anymore. You can't get through. We did have, during COVID, we did have one school in, sorry to look away, but I have to look it up.
Yep.
In New Lexington, Ohio, actually bought a copy of Show Calf? Cow poop. Bought a copy of Cow Poop for every kid in their school.
Oh, wow.
It was a middle school. And then they all read it, and the librarians did a stunning amount of work to put together a whole, they had a math problem built around the book. They had a art project built around the book. They had shop classes built around the book. Just, oh my God, it was so honoring. In fact, at that time, I didn't have any audio books, and I didn't understand this, but some kids have a learning directive that if they're handed a book, there has to be a book on tape that goes with it.
Interesting.
So they'll be able to follow along and make themselves stronger. Well, I hadn't provided that. One of the librarians recorded the book.
Now that's a good school.
Oh man, are you kidding me?
Wow.
And then we put it together and we did a Zoom meeting.
Nice.
And I think we did the Zoom meeting. They had a screen and computer in every classroom. And so I had them all up on the screen, and I gave them my 40-minute talk. And I think we took questions I think we were talking to them for 2.5 hours.
Jeez.
Oh yeah.
Wow.
Are you kidding? What? It's crazy. So
Amazing.
it's not as good as being in person, but oh, it's so honoring to be a part of that,
Yeah.
But like I said, now there's so much of a hole they've got to dig out of.
Yep.
As far as what we lost during COVID, that I don't know how all that's going to come back together. So
any new ideas on marketing, getting the word out?
We're looking around and we're knocking on doors, but we're not having much luck. It's
you get on many things like this, podcasts and web shows and things?
Not really.
No,
it's pretty and maybe it's, well, I don't. So here's the problem, I think. Okay. What is our product? We write books for kids that don't read. Okay. So who's our customer? Well, it's not the kid, right? It's not the parents of the kid, probably, because if the parents of the kid had been really active when the kids were 4 and 5, books probably aren't a big part of that household. So it's not that. So, and then if it's not the librarians, for whatever reason, and one of the reasons is because schools are having their budgets cut back, and so the real way that librarians stock their shelves is they have a scholastic book fair, and then they buy their books out of their margin that they get for the book, right? So that's that monoculture that we can't get into. And then independent bookstores, of course, are gone. So it's the marketplace is very, very, very broken.
So it does get to a question might be wondering out there, why the heck would I have a kid's book author on manufacturing talks? And, I think that it does tie to that pipeline we've talked about. And,
Right.
Everyone now is struggling because we didn't have the kids from the previous generation going into the skilled trades. And one reason for that is they had no knowledge of them. Again, you talked about it. We kicked all our shop teachers out of the schools. All the equipment went away. So they had no exposure to it. Fewer and fewer do things like that at home. And then you don't have books like yours that introduce them to anything like that. And
well,
so
and
what I would say,
those kids, sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Those kids that we want in that pipeline learn viscerally. They learn by touching things and smelling things and getting cuts in their hands and by burning themselves.
Yep.
And if all of those things are gone, those kids don't have a connection to the world.
Yep.
And boy, if you can't see that, you're a blind man. I just, it's horrible. I try and whenever I talk to middle school science teachers, especially, I say, you can't teach chemistry unless you blow stuff up, right? It just can't. You have to make that noise for kids to get it.
Right.
And they just shake their heads at me like, there is no way we can blow stuff up.
Yeah. Well,
and I'll tell you, my first patent is an electric cell to disinfect water. And it's since become a big company called Aqua Access out of Albuquerque. And my patent's long ago gone. But the discovery that I made that started the patent process was we were trying to figure out what gases were bubbling up out of this cell because it was made differently and it was supposed to be doing something different. And so I caught the gases in a sandwich bag and lit it on fire. And it blew up, and we had to go home for a while. But because of the way it blew up, we knew it wasn't hydrogen, it wasn't just oxygen, and it wasn't chlorine, and it wasn't any kind of weird sodium thing. It was stoichiometric hydrogen and oxygen, because a little tiny sandwich bag of it really made a big noise. But I don't know how I would have known that if we hadn't have done that in chemistry class.
Yeah. Yep.
Because I can tell you exactly, if you fill a baggie full of pure hydrogen, it burns like that, right? You can watch it. It's nice and slow and it's cool. And if it blows up, you've got nearly stoichiometric hydrogen and oxygen. So how do you know that unless you've done the experiment already?
Yep.
So
you have, through your books, introduced kids to a lot of different and cool subjects. And what I would throw out to my manufacturing compatriots, those of you who are working on developing that new path to get kids into the trades and to build our manufacturing workforces, they got to have these kinds of books when they're young. They got to be introduced to these things before they ever get to that point where then they have to be thinking about robotics classes and shop classes and things like that. So get the books in the hands of the kids that you want to reach out to and get into that pipeline.
People ask why I don't write at a slightly higher level for the 14 to 16-year-olds. And my answer is that those kids they're fighting a fight at that point.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
They're not going to be listening to outside advice unless they're already have that habit.
Right.
So it's the kids that are 10 years old to 12 years old that you can say, okay, this is how we think, right? This is how you can go from having a problem to having a solved problem. And if you can reach them and develop those habits much easier in the 9-year-old to 12-year-old zone than trying to patch it back up when they're 14 to 16. So another pet peeve of mine is when little kids can't work.
16,
if you don't have a work ethic by the time you're 16, you're not going to have a work ethic. Maybe by the time you're 25, you'll grow up and you'll want to stop being a jerk. But if you have if you're not working at 12, if you're not getting up in the morning and going and providing value and harvesting some of that value at 12, I don't know how you learn it in your life.
Yeah. You're right.
That's why 4-H and FFA and AWS and all those kinds of things are so terrific and need our support at every level, because the kid can do work in a sheltered way, but they know it's their work and they can see the fruits of that labor. And that's huge.
Definitely. Are you still writing new books?
Well, we finished the last one, which is called Assistance Dog.
I don't think I've seen that one.
A year ago.
Okay. I'll have to look that up.
I don't know what we're going to do. It's unless we can't fix the marketplace.
Yeah.
And unless we can find a way in, my Nancy tells me, well, just write them. At least your grandkids will read them.
I'm reading them.
Yeah, exactly. So
me and my boys will read them.
Right. So, it's another business thing. It's another manufacturing thing, right? You've got to keep searching around to find a marketplace for your ideas, or you're not contributing to society. And so the marketplace is what we're working on now and trying to figure that out. And it's
got it.
Amazon made it super easy to self-publish.
Yep.
So any idiot can do it, and several idiots are.
Yeah.
And there's no good way to do market differentiation that we can find.
Yep. Easy to get books out there, but not easy to make them move, right?
Correct. The manufacturing part has become trivial.
Yep.
Doing a good job of it is not any easier than it used to be, but the consumer can't see that.
Right.
And they have, you don't need to buy too many books you've never heard of on Amazon to see that there isn't a lot of sorting and qualification going on.
That is true. Yep. So one last note before we wrap up, to just kind of take a complete left turn here. Tell us about the book you wrote about your sailing adventures.
Sure. So the kids got to middle school, which for both Nancy and I don't really have fond memories of middle school. So we kind of let's come up with a different idea. So we thought, well, let's go around the country in an RV. That'll be something interesting, and we can homeschool. So we looked into that, and then we kept looking, and we found out that because of the underwater video cameras, we had quite a few friends in the yachting industry, and of course we boated all the time up in Puget Sound.
Mm-hmm.
So from talking to friends, we put a plan together, and we ended up buying a sailboat in St. Martin and then sailing the Caribbean for a year with the kids.
That is so cool.
When we put that plan together, the kids had been boating on Puget Sound, which is cold and murky. It's green.
Mm-hmm.
And so we told them we're going to go somewhere where it's warm all the time, where the water's 82 degrees, where you can see the anchor when it hits the ground in 90 feet of sand.
Yep.
You can lay on the beach whenever you want, and they didn't believe us. So this was before YouTube was a thing and all that stuff. They just didn't believe that they thought we were lying to them. So actually what I did on the trip was put together a video, which is now on YouTube. If you search for my name, you'll be able to find it. And it's and we put together a half-hour video on all the latest, digital 8 camcorder stuff, and then edited it 3 minutes a time on our state-of-the-art laptop and put it all together. And then because that sold, we put together a book, and it's just a simple little, actually I've got a copy. It's just a really simple little, where am I going?
Yep, there you go.
Little book with just our emails from the trip and pictures from the trip. And but at the time it came out right when the Kindle came out.
Oh, perfect.
So we hit that just right, and we sold quite a few copies on Kindle for wannabe sailors the boat industry is funny. There's for every person that owns a boat, there's probably 100 people or for every person that uses a boat, there's about 90 people that own a boat and don't use it, and 20,000 people that just want to dream about it, right?
Yep.
So a book is the right product to sell into the marine industry. So.
Yes, good. Well, and so I'm going to reiterate, those of you who are trying to work on building our skilled trades pipeline, get these books into the hands of the kids that you deal with. What else can people do, not just around your books, but this whole reading situation and education situation in general? Phil, what should people be doing themselves to try to remedy things?
Let me answer that in a second, but let me bring up one other thing.
Yep, go ahead.
I hate video games. Okay.
Yeah.
I don't mean a little bit. I mean, I really, really hate them, because the people that design them know exactly what they're doing. And every time they get a button push or get something to happen, your brain releases chemicals, dopamine, right? Yep. And it's creating an addiction to that dopamine that's as strong or stronger than a heroin addiction. But the heroin is made inside. And the people that are building these games know that. And they know, and if you want to look into it, there's all kinds of scientific papers about what's the right hit rate and what's the right button flash to get that dopamine production up. And I hate it so much, I actually got a patent on playing a video game where you would play as your own immune system. So if you had cancer, you would go in and you would fight the cancer within your body. Okay. Because if we can make dopamine like that, we can make an immune response. Okay. So what should a parent do? What should an aunt or an uncle or a grandparent do? Fight video games as hard as you can for as long as you can, and social media. And that's almost impossible with the way the education system is built right now.
Yep,
right?
Right.
When the kids were sent home for COVID, they were all sent home with an iPad. So our grandkids had grown up screen free. And the first things that they did during COVID was play video games to learn how to use their iPad so that they could play video games, which are theoretically teaching them math.
Yeah.
So fight that as hard as you can. Model reading, model discussion of books, right? The important thing about reading is that that's how we experience reality, right? When you read a book, you chunk the words off the page, and then you stick them in your brain and you create reality inside your head. And that's where the book really happens. Yeah. Right. But if you're watching TV or you're watching YouTube or any of that stuff, you're not getting that level of engagement. You're passive. But book reading is an active thing, which is also the same way that we deal with reality. I just saw something happen. So what's really going on here? And then you have to go through it again and again in your head and figure out, why did that just happen? And then, so that's why reading is so important. So, and there's lots and lots of studies about reading, but you just have to model it, and you just have to make it normal for the kids. And you have to do that when it's really little. And I don't know how you do it if you've lost it, if they miss that opportunity.
Yep.
So,
well, all excellent advice. I'm going to wrap up with one other observation. One of the things I really value about our interaction is we're connected there on LinkedIn, and Phil is one of those guys who will point out the truth in the face of whatever BS is coming down. Doesn't matter who's spouting it or, how many people are spouting it. And I love your very mature, very factual pushback against the absolute torrent of BS that we have coming down the pike anymore. So
it really
keep
is
up that
crazy.
Excellent work.
Thank you for that. I'm getting, the last month, I think I've been called a racist old white man way more times than I want to.
Isn't that lovely?
It's crazy.
Yep.
It's crazy. Imagine being that lazy in your thinking process.
Yeah, but it's an epidemic anymore. I see the same thing now on the web show. I had a guy named Mark Mills on to talk about the undeniable reality that we're not going to have the metals and minerals to do this transition,
Right.
in the air quotes, that everyone's talking about. And yeah, so someone gets on there and comments, well, a couple old white guys.
Yeah. Yeah.
Really? That's your argument?
Like the rocks care.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
They don't know.
Oh, no, I hide from the
we're
old white guys. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, good deal. Anything to wrap up, Phil?
Thank you very much, Jim. I really appreciate
thank you.
this.
I appreciate you coming on. And everyone out there, follow Phil on LinkedIn, get on Amazon, look up his books, get everyone. I mean, they're very affordable and they are wonderful books. In fact, I need to jump back in and reread them, and I got to get that last one. I don't think I have it. So, yeah, thanks again, Phil. Appreciate you jumping on with us.
Thank you very much.
And thank you, all you guys out there who watch and listen to the show. We'll keep them coming every Tuesday. So tune in, and I can't promise they're all going to be as fascinating as what Phil brought to us today, but they're going to be fascinating. Trust me. Thanks again. So long.
Thanks for tuning in to Manufacturing Talks with Jim Vinosky. Watch for new episodes dropping every Tuesday. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe.